I mean, look, it was a hard foul. I don't think that Dejanay intentionally came out to get her across the neck like she did. But it did happen, and I thought it was the right call. But one of the things about Nay is that she's going to play her butt off, man. She's going to compete. Nobody's going to go walking in for a layup, and so I don't oppose the hard foul. But I also don't think that she intentionally went for the neck. Yeah, I mean, look, it was a hard foul. I don't think that Dejanay intentionally came out to get her across the neck like she did. But it did happen, and I thought it was the right call. But one of the things about Nay is that she's going to play her butt off, man. She's going to compete. Nobody's going to go walking in for a layup, and so I don't oppose the hard foul. But I also don't think that she intentionally went for the neck.
Yeah, so Carrington is a dirty player, probably the dirtiest player in the league. And then she has the audacity to go online right after her ejection and claim that she got ejected because of racism. She definitely learned well from Angel Reese. Whenever something goes against you, just pull out that race card. I think she's jealous of my natural blonde hair. She'll never have this hair. I literally got clotheslined in the air, and this clown has to turn it into race. Her level of IQ needs to be studied for generations. But anyways, it was an easy dub for us.
The Stephanie White situation has reached a genuinely significant inflection point, and we need to have a very serious conversation about what is happening right now, because the scope of this story has expanded well beyond the basketball court and the post-game press conference. The political dimension of this situation has now arrived with full force, and it is not retreating.
What is the method to her madness? I'm talking about Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White. I have brought this up multiple times, how she doesn't go out of her way to defend her players, especially Sophie Cunningham. I mentioned it last week when Sophie Cunningham was elbowed in the face and Cunningham was whistled for the foul. No argument by Stephanie White, even though it was so obvious Cunningham was the victim there. And then, of course, what happened Saturday, Dejanay Carrington taking out Sophie Cunningham. We all saw the video. We all saw what happened to Carrington. We all saw and read her Threads post after she was thrown out of the game. And oh, by the way, where is the league on this? I don't care what, even though it was ridiculous that she wrote white privilege, by the way, but I don't care if she wrote, dog privilege. You should not be allowed, after you're thrown out of a game, during a game, whenever, players should not be allowed to post on social media. Is there a fine coming there to Miss Carrington? For goodness sake. What is going on with this league? But let's get back to Stephanie White. In the post game, after Saturday's win by the Fever, which, oh, by the way, Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell continue to light up everything. Fantastic combo. What a team. Stephanie White is defending Dejanay Carrington. I didn't hear anything about Sophie Cunningham, her own player. All I heard was about, that's the way Dejanay plays. That's the way she plays.
Between these two franchises. Whether that interpretation is precisely accurate, or whether an alternative explanation exists for why Carrington chose to post that specific number in that specific moment, is something that individuals can assess based on the available context and their own judgment. What is not in dispute is the timing, the specific content of the post, and the undeniable fact that August 23rd is the date of the next Fever Sky game. The conversation that has erupted around that post reflects a basketball community that has been watching the targeting patterns surrounding Indiana players throughout this entire season, and that is applying all of that accumulated context to each new development as it surfaces. The WNBA's assessment of whether Carrington should face additional suspension or disciplinary consequences beyond the in-game ejection is now one of the most central outstanding questions surrounding this situation. If Carrington is not suspended, the message delivered to the league's players about the institutional cost of delivering a flagrant 2 foul on an Indiana Fever player is a message that has been communicated consistently throughout this season and that reflects the same pattern of inadequate disciplinary response. Turn to the core of the Stephanie White situation, because everything else that is happening connects directly back to her conduct at that press conference and to the broader pattern of coaching behavior that press conference moment represents in its most concentrated and documented form. Stephanie White sat at that podium and defended Dejanay Carrington. She used language describing Carrington as someone who plays competitively and who is not going to allow uncontested layups. She framed Carrington's approach in terms that functioned as justification for the contact that had just produced a flagrant 2 ejection and left Sophie Cunningham bleeding from the mouth. The professional history between Stephanie White and Dejonae Carrington is relevant context that observers have noted. Carrington played for White when White was coaching in Connecticut. That professional relationship and whatever personal loyalty it may have generated is part of what appears to be driving White's public defense of a player who harmed one of her current roster members. Professional relationships formed in shared coaching environments are real, and they influence behavior. That reality does not alter the coaching standard being violated here. When a former player delivers a flagrant 2 foul on your current player, your obligation to your current player supersedes every other consideration, including personal history and shared professional experience. That is the foundational requirement of the coaching position. Stephanie White failed it completely and publicly. The pattern that this specific press conference moment confirms is one that observers have been documenting with increasing frustration since the beginning of this season. When Alyssa Thomas delivered physical contact to Caitlin Clark that generated congressional attention and NBA Commissioner public intervention, White's response was characterized as wholly inadequate by the basketball community. When other documented incidents of physical conduct directed at Clark or her teammates occurred across this season, White's sideline advocacy and post-game press conference language consistently fell below what the situations demanded of a head coach with genuine loyalty to the players in her care. The specific and documented failure that has been named repeatedly throughout this season is that White does not challenge fouls on behalf of her players. A head coach who watches opposing players protect and develop the most commercially significant player in the history of this sport. The comments circulating following White's Carrington defense press conference reflect a fan base that has genuinely reached its capacity for absorbing institutional disappointment from the coaching staff. The characterization that Caitlin Clark fully embraced Indiana, made it her home, and brought extraordinary economic value to the state and to this franchise, while the coaching staff consistently failed to protect her interests, is a characterization that the documented record of this season fully supports. The call from multiple voices, now including the Lieutenant Governor of Indiana, for the Fever to part ways with Stephanie White, represents the accumulated weight of a full season of observable coaching decisions that have consistently worked against the interests of the players directly and publicly, particularly now that the Lieutenant Governor has placed his position in the public record. When an elected official of the state publicly calls for a coaching change, the franchise has an obligation to respond with institutional action or institutional clarity, rather than the silence that has too often characterized this organization's response to accountability moments throughout this difficult season. The commercial stakes of the coaching are measurable and extraordinary in the context of what the WNBA has historically produced in any market. The institutional environment that has surrounded that player inside her own organization has been characterized throughout this season by insufficient advocacy, selective protection, and now a press conference where the head coach publicly defended the opposing player who delivered a flagrant 2 foul on a member of her own team. The ownership group that benefits commercially from Clark's presence has a direct financial interest in ensuring that the organizational environment around her reflects the value she brings to this franchise and to this state. The broader pattern of how this coaching staff has approached the protection of Clark and her teammates throughout this entire season deserves one more direct examination in the context of genuine player advocacy. And now, the defense of Carrington following a flagrant 2 ejection. Each individual incident could theoretically be explained in isolation. The accumulated pattern across a full season does not permit that kind of isolated treatment. It reflects a coaching approach that has consistently prioritized other considerations over the institutional protection of the players on Indiana's own roster. Dejonae Carrington's social media post referencing the WNBA owes this franchise, this star player, and this fan base a disciplinary response to the Carrington incident that reflects the full severity of a flagrant offense and the political leadership of the state that has embraced this team, a response to what their head coach said at that press conference. The Lieutenant Governor has spoken. The basketball community has spoken. The fans who have been documenting this pattern for an entire season have spoken. Sophie Cunningham has dried blood from a flagrant 2 foul, while the coach who should have defended her publicly chose to defend the player who put her on the floor instead. That is the documented reality of where this franchise stands right now. The organization owes everyone who has invested in it a response that matches the gravity and the urgency of what has occurred this week. Institutional silence is not an acceptable answer to a moment of this magnitude and this public visibility. The time for decisive organizational action is not approaching. It has arrived.